Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast, where guests discuss all things classical theater with your host, Nathan Winkelstein.
Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. I am your host, Nathan Winkelstein, and I am thrilled to welcome to the podcast today one of the most dynamic classical performers of her generation, the star of many a classical production, both in New York City and regionally, not to mention all that Broadway and TV stuff, etc., etc., etc. My guest is the effervescent Kelley Curran. Hi, Kelley. How are you?
Hi, Nathan. I'm so happy to be here and excited to talk about this play and this scene with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the pod. A little inside baseball. Kelley and I were actually in a production together a long time ago of Henry IV at Shakespeare Theatre Company. So we've known each other for quite a while. Since then, Kelley has continued her rise to stardom, and I have correctly figured out that my role is to not do that. So here we are.
Well, we're all the luckier to still have you in the field guiding the way.
Well, yes. Well, thank you. Thank you. She's just as kind now as she was back then. So today you have agreed to dive into the role of Hermione from The Winter's Tale, a role you tackled in 2018 at Theatre for a New Audience in a production directed by the great Aaron Arbus. And we will be honing in specifically on the famous trial scene in Act 3, Scene 2, for those of you following along at home, where Hermione, having just given birth, is made to stand in defense of an accusation of adultery and treason against her husband, Leontes, who is also standing as judge in the trial. We will be exploring specifically the similarities and differences between Hermione's two major speeches in the scene, which means this will be a slightly longer read than usual, and our listeners will have to bear with my Leontes, for which, as always, I ask for grace. And we will be beginning momentarily. So, Kelley, whenever you are ready, we can start.
Great, thank you. Since what I am to say must be but that which contradicts my accusation, and the testimony on my part no other but what comes from myself, it shall scarce boot me to say not guilty. Mine integrity, being counted falsehood, shall, as I express it, be so received. But thus, if powers divine behold our human actions as they do, I doubt not then, but innocence shall make false accusation blush, and tyranny tremble at patience. You, my lord, best know, whom least will seem to do so. My past life hath been as continent, as chaste, as true, as I am now unhappy, which is more than history can pattern, though devised and played to take spectators. For behold me, a fellow of the royal bed, which owe a moiety of the throne, a great king's daughter, the mother to a hopeful prince, here standing to prate and talk for life and honor, for who it please to come and hear. For life I prize it, as I weigh grief which I would spare. For honor, 'tis a derivative from me to mine, and only that I stand for. I appeal to your own conscience, sir. Before Polixenes came to your court, how I was in your grace, how merited to be so. Since he came, with what encounter so uncurrent I have strained to appear thus, if one jot beyond the bound of honor, or in act or will that way inclining, hardened be the hearts of all that hear me, and my nearest of kin cry fie upon my grave.
I ne'er heard yet that any of these bolder vices wanted less impudence to gainsay what they did than to perform it first.
That's true enough, though 'tis a saying, sir, not due to me.
You will not own it.
More than mistress of which comes to me in name of fault, I must not at all acknowledge. For Polixenes, with whom I am accused, I do confess, I loved him as in honor he required, with such a kind of love as might become a lady like me, with a love even such, so, and no other, as yourself commanded. which not to have done, I think, had been in me both disobedience and ingratitude to you and toward your friend, whose love had spoke, even since it could speak from an infant freely, that it was yours. Now, for conspiracy. I know not how it tastes, though it be dished for me to try how. All I know of it is that Camillo was an honest man, and why he left your court the gods themselves, wotting no more than I, are ignorant.
You knew of his departure, as you know what you have undertaken to do in his absence.
Sir, you speak a language that I understand not. My life stands in the level of your dreams, which I'll lay down.
Your actions are my dreams. You had a bastard by Polixenes, and I but dreamed it. As you were past all shame, those of your fact are so past all truth, which to deny concerns more than avails. For as thy brat hath been cast out, like to itself, no father owning it, which is indeed more criminal in thee than it, so thou shall feel our justice, in whose easiest passage look for no less than death.
So spare your threats. The bug which you would fright me with, I seek. To me can life be no commodity, the crown and comfort of my life, your favor, I do give lost. For I do feel it gone, but know not how it went. My second joy and first fruits of my body from his presence, I am barred like one infectious. My third comfort, starred most unluckily, is from my breast. The innocent milk in it most innocent mouth, hailed out to murder, myself on every post proclaimed a strumpet with immodest hatred. The childbed privilege denied, which longs to women of all fashion, lastly hurried here to this place in the open air before I have got strength of limit now, my liege. Tell me what blessings I have here alive that I should fear to die. Therefore proceed. But yet hear this, mistake me not, no life, I prize it not a straw, but for mine honor, which I would free, if I shall be condemned upon surmises, all proofs sleeping else, but what your jealousies awake, I tell you, 'tis rigor and not law, your honors all. I do refer me to the oracle, Apollo be my judge.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my God, this scene. Oh my God.
Does it bring back positive or negative memories from your time in 2018?
Everything, all the memories. I mean, it's so challenging as an actor. I think for me it was so challenging. I feel like I'll never be done with it. I could play this role for the rest of my life and feel like I never quite got there, only because I think it requires such profound trust to let the language be, to let the language is so powerful and so profound and has like a really searing clarity to it. The arguments are so clear, but also the structure of the verse is so kind of jagged and wild, and she has all these bizarre line endings. And I think as an actor, the trap is kind of trying to do too much or trying to do everything in order to give justice to this character and her plight. But I think like the real sophisticated move, which I don't know if I ever accomplished in performance or ever will, is to let the play be the play and just plant your feet and speak the text as simply as you can.
Well, and you are it's actually interesting that you brought it up right away, because it wasn't going to be my first question, but it was something I clocked as you were reading, is for people following along, they probably noticed it too. You are an extremely loyal verse speaker. You are quite loyal to the ends of the lines and to the kind of working through midline caesuras and all of that stuff. And I know that in the discourse of Shakespeare and Shakespeare training, there's lots of different levels of how loyal one wants to be to verse. And as I think is explicitly clear in how you were even able to just give that read there, you clearly find great freedom within the verse structure. So I wonder if just first, before we really dig into the scene, you could speak a little bit to your mindset of attacking verse and of recognizing end lines and following. Can you just give us, I recognize you could probably talk about this for hours, but just a little touch into what you look at when you're reading this verse for help, basically, as an actor?
Sure. Yeah. I think the thing that is most interesting when you're approaching one of these plays is like, well, one, when is the character in verse and when are they in prose? That's always sort of a hint into this sort of state of the person's emotional state and what they're dealing with. And then, when a character has a complete thought in a complete verse line, there's such an ease to that. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. It is the East and Julie. I mean, there's such an ease of thought, and it's usually a clue into not just the emotional state, but the body, the physical body of the character, and like what they're navigating. And I think what's so extraordinary about Hermione's verse in this scene is that these line endings are so abrupt and jarring just in the first few lines. Since what I am to say must be but that which contradicts my accusation and the testimony. And it's like a hint that she is, one, perhaps she just can't catch her breath. She literally just came from giving birth, not in some cushy, luxurious hospital or, her own bedroom, but in prison. And so she was sort of dragged from prison to the middle of this courtroom, and she's dealing with the trauma of what her body has just been through and the trauma of what is confronting her in the moment with these accusations by her husband. And I think there's an incredible, in spite of the fact that there's such clarity of thought, if you were to read this and just follow the thought through to the end of the thought and sort of forget the verse lines altogether, it's a flawless argument, and there's such clarity, and there's such, she's just like brilliantly articulating point to point to point to point to point. She's a logician, you know what I mean? It's just her mind is right there. But I think what the verse structure gives us clues into is that her body is not. Her body is navigating whole other challenges right now, even though her mind is sort of like clinging to her logic and ferociously clinging to her logic. And so that,
I think that's,
to me, is a huge...
I was just going to say...
No, yeah.
I think that's brilliant. What I really love about what you're saying, which I fiercely agree with, but also have not heard put so clearly, is this idea that the ends of the lines are yet another tool to, it's not something that limits you. I must breathe. I must snap my fingers. I must pause. But it's a hint. It's a hint to something having to go with the character. Why isn't she able to smoothly put her lines in, even though outside of verse she's perfect?
Yes.
And that shows, it allows you to layer character through both verse and the grammatic kind of litigious thing for speech. And I love that you're looking at the technical elements of verse as a way to free a character and specify a character rather than a box that one is stuck in. I think that's that's exciting to hear.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I think if anything, it's like, it almost like Shakespeare almost gives you too much delicious choice to play with. Like if you that you could choose to follow just the line of thought at different moments, or there are some lines that make sense that she would just keep running on because the thought is so clear and so right at her fingertips, but that you also have the opportunity to end a verse line on the word and decide she hasn't quite figured out what the next word is, because she is struggling not to be at a loss, and she is struggling to get her balance and to get her feet and to be firing on all cylinders, because she's fighting for her life, and she's fighting for her honor. She's fighting for not just her life, but her legacy, which will affect her children. And so she's not just fighting for herself here, she's fighting for her children. And so there's a tremendous amount at stake. And something I love about the scene that I had sort of forgotten until I was rereading it in preparation for this discussion, I forgot that, I think my favorite moment of text that Hermione has in the whole play is in between the two speeches, the two large speeches, where she has a single line with the word "sir." It's just the word "sir" and then a blank verse line. And she says, "Sir, you speak a language that I understand not." And it's so impactful that she has this word "sir" and all these empty I ams, all these empty feet, because to me it's like the moment of realization that she could make the greatest argument in the world. She could, out-reason, the greatest orator who ever lived, and she has still lost him. He is so lost to her. And this was the person that I believe she loved most in the world, certainly was the closest to. And it's a moment where she realizes he's just gone. Whatever reason she can come up with, she's not going to be able to reason with him. And I think in some ways that is the moment that you need in order to transition to that second speech, which actually, like rhythmically, for the first time, there are a couple of whole thoughts in whole verse lines in that second speech, almost like her body has calmed down. The bug which you would fright me with, I seek, is a whole thought in one line, and it's the first time we get a sense that she's been able to sort of catch her breath. And in some ways, I think it's because she realized that the argument with him is over, no matter what she does.
So many interesting points in that. I'm trying to think about... So first of all, the fact that "sir" is its own verse line, I somehow completely missed because it's so strange that I think I didn't even bother counting what you have undertaken to do in his absence. I just assumed that had to be 9 and that "sir" had to, but it's not. It is its own verse line. It's amazing. That's incredible.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing because there's nothing to say. There's nothing to say when she realizes how far gone he is in his own mind.
And that is something that I definitely clocked in working through this, was that I just didn't clock the 9 missing beats, but that it is right there that she stops debating. Yeah. That the first speech seems to be still really trying to get Leontes to hear her. And the next few little blurbs also seem to be trying to get Leontes to hear her. And it's right here that she's like, I got nothing now.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So then let me ask you about the other major thing that happens here, which I assume also must affect the difference between the two speeches. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that it is in Leontes' speech is the first time you find out that the child you just gave birth to has been cast away into the wilderness. Did you know that coming in?
I don't think so. No one, if I'm remembering correctly, no one mentions that. No one makes an allusion to that before this moment.
Not in this scene, they certainly don't.
They don't. And I think, the last I knew, Paulina took the baby to Leontes and confronted Leontes with the baby. And that's perhaps the last time the last time I saw the baby before this scene, but there's nothing that leads me to believe that anyone knows or that Hermione knows what he decided to do.
Right, and given that what you just spoke about how her fight is significantly less for her life than it is for her honor because it is derivative. Fine, and also just given that she's a mom, like it's also simpler than that. Yeah. That like just finding out mid-speech that one of the two lives that you were truly fighting for, you think is gone.
Yes,
has to be a huge change as well. If you thought your relationship with Leontes was salvageable, I would imagine, after that moment.
Oh, yeah.
It's not, except in a fairy tale, which of course this play is, and it does salvage itself away at the end. But that's
in some ways, yes. In some ways, there is the resurrection. There is 16 years of atonement and a resurrection, and that's what makes the future possible, which is no small amount of time. But you make such a good point there that is what allows her that when Leontes says to her, "Look for no less than death," it is no longer a threat. There is nothing left to live for. If he is gone, if his love is gone, if the relationship to him is gone, if she's barred from seeing her son, and if the child has been cast out of the kingdom, the baby that she just had, there's nothing left to live for. And the only thing left to protect, which she finally gets to at the end of that second speech, is her honor for her children's sake. And also, I do love how she, it's this intensely bizarre scene of like a private relationship playing out on the most public stage it could possibly play out on. And they're the leaders of their country. They're the leaders of a nation. And I love how at the very end, she also like stands up for good governance. Like she also says, like, don't fool yourself into thinking that, like, she calls it essentially, she says what he's doing is tyrannical, that she says this is rigor and not law. And she says it so publicly, like, don't mistake this for law because this is a perversion of the law. And I love that even in what might be some of her last moments before she's executed or whatever he is going to decide to do to her before the oracle speaks, that she calls him out on also his like really poor leadership. That she's like, this is, you're acting like a tyrant. It's a very brave thing to do. The whole scene is an act of courage.
Yes, and I was going to ask, and I think you may have just answered it, of when you say that there's kind of nothing left for her after that speech, is that I don't know that that he's beginning to suspect the older child as well. Like, he has that wonderful speech where he wonders whether it's his face or not. Mm-hmm. And so the big honor derivative thing was for the youngest child who's been cast out. Like, it's lost. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, then why does she still stand up for honor? But the answer is honor and justice in its own thing matters, especially as a good ruler, which she is.
Yes. And yes, absolutely. And I think that the argument too, I mean, Paulina, like the other really marvelous woman in the court, her speeches speak to that so well. In the scene prior to this, when she brings the baby to him and he threatens to burn her. He says, I'll have you burnt like a witch. And she has this wonderful line where she says, it is the heretic that makes the fire, not she that burns in it. And it's just like it is so brilliant. It is such and I think Hermione here, in not so many words, because Paulina is in a private scene and she can speak plainly to the king, even though that is incredibly brave as well. And so in not so many direct and piercing words, Hermione is saying the same thing. And she's saying it publicly because it's important that her countrymen know that this is not okay. And not acceptable.
It does make me dramaturgically. This is not my area of expertise, so forgive me, but this is during King James' reign, who was famously obsessed with witches, which shows that there may have also been an act of bravery on the part of the playwright, which Shakespeare is actually notorious for dancing that dance and never, but to have a woman be threatened with burning by a king of a nation and have that woman say it is the heretic who lights the fire, not the one who burns, may show that, like, Shakespeare at his older age was like, whatever, let's do it.
I mean, it is so bold. It is so bold. And it's, one of the lines that he wrote, whoever Shakespeare was, that makes me feel like you can't tell me they weren't a feminist person. You can't tell me that they didn't believe in the wisdom and the power of the female in society. Because, and this play to me is maybe the strongest argument for that. The entire play is. So, yeah, I think that's incredible to think about, that he might have been saying that to King James.
Yeah, and as the king's man.
Yes.
It's a fascinating, actually. I wonder how you can imagine writing that line and being like, let's keep it.
This time. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, he paints such an extraordinary portrait of tyranny in Leontes, like this man who's just like has an exceptional imagination and a brilliant mind, and that it just kind of turns and sours, and how quickly that imagination gets sort of perverted into something destructive. And that is like the heart of the tyrant.
And it's such an astonishing, I was going to ask you about this because it so strongly affects this scene, is it seems in reading the text that in the first scene where you meet them, before he drinks from the cup and sees the spider, they're an incredibly happy, they're a dream couple.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any warning signs whatsoever, and then he, I don't know, has a schizophrenic break. Something happens. And I guess I'm curious how, as Hermione, how you dealt with the idea that it's so out of character from the man you love that you must also be trying to bring him back, trying to speak to the man you know him to be. I'm curious about that element of it, about whether you felt when you were doing this scene or when you were working on this scene, how much, if any, objective there was of trying to get back the man who had been there for 30 years. Was that part of your journey with it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's absolutely in there. It's absolutely in the language, and it's such a good point to bring up, because when he first kind of storms into, I think it's Mamillius at their son's bedroom, when she's sitting with Mamillius and she says, "Tell me a story," which is basically like, "Tell me a tale for winter," and it's this beautiful scene of them sitting in the child's bedroom, and that's where Leontes interrupts them and accuses her of adultery and conspiracy and all this stuff. And her first response is this a game? Like, she literally has some line where she says something to that effect, like, "Is this sport? Are you joking?" Like, that's what it's so out of character and so bizarre that she can't believe it's really happening. It has to be some sort of like a prank he's playing at first. And then she has a wonderful line when she exits that scene. Oh, I hope I can find it. She has a wonderful line when she exits that scene where she says, "I never wish to see you sorry. And now I know I shall," or something, because I think there's so much affection and love between them that is a real thing, that she never wished to see him feel that kind of pain, but he's bringing it on himself. He's created it himself, so now she can't prevent that from happening to him. And in that moment, there's so much like poise and wisdom there that she's able to sort of like take a step back and say, he's in pain and he's created this pain, and this is not going to go well, And then I think when it comes to the trial scene, I think it's absolutely true that part of this argument is just to get him back, to find him again. She has that moment mid-line. She says, "You, my lord, best know, whom least will seem to do so." And it's such a personal address to him in the middle, and she's just had this sort of complicated sentence about what I am to say contradicts my accusation, and like she's like using all these diplomatic words and walking this tightrope of diplomacy and this public moment. And then suddenly she kind of cuts to the chase and she says, "You know better than anyone else who I am and what our life is like." And I think it's an immediate call to him personally. It's an immediate way to block out everyone else who's in the room and to speak privately and directly and personally to him. And to me, that was always like the first moment of that, where she sort of let go of the fact that she was like walking this diplomatic tightrope and not wanting to call him a tyrant in front of his people. And, she just speaks directly to him. And then she continues to sort of use language like that in the first speech, where she says, "Behold me, a fellow of the royal bed, which owe a moiety of the throne." And the other person in that equation is him. And she's saying, this has always been you and I. Part of what makes me a great queen is that I'm a fellow of your bed, which again is a call to him, like, remember this, remember me, remember who we are. And later in that speech, another one of my favorite parts is how she says, "I appeal to your own conscience, sir. Before Polixenes came to your court, how I was in your grace, how merited to be so." Like, what it meant to her to be loved by him and to be admired by him. And all of these, I think, are very personal and very private calls to him, saying, like, come back to me, come back to who we were, come back to what I remember our life is, because this is not you, and this is something else. So to me, yeah, she's definitely making sort of personal protests to him throughout the entire very public speech.
It's that my lord line that you first mentioned is fascinating. Is that the only time she uses an honorific other than sir in the scene?
I think so. I'm looking at it, and yeah, I think so. And, near the end of her two speeches, when she's saying, like, there's what blessings have I here alive that I should fear to die, she even goes beyond sir to say, "Now my liege." She's like using these like titles of distance and propriety, and also how delicious to say the word "my liege" instead of "sir," because you can really lean into it. And she's like sticking it to him because she's angry. She's angry too. This is absurd, and this is tyranny, and this is wrong, and this is injustice. And so I think what's interesting is, like, the first speech is certainly the most intimate. And after she realizes he has really lost his mind, and therefore she has really lost him, and that he has just turned full tyrant, it becomes less and less intimate and more sort of like ironic in the way she addresses him in such a public manner.
Well, and that makes sense to me, is that, and then also that the knowledge of the unforgivable act happens between the two, and how in the first, so it's interesting to me to think about it from an objective perspective of, like, that in that first scene, the objective of, if I just fix this mistake, I can still have everything back. I can still have my kids, my honor, and my love back. And by the final one, it's like, no, I give those things lost. I accept that they are lost.
Yes.
And therefore, I'm going to go at you with everything I have.
Yeah.
And I'm going to call you what you are. I'm going to say it's tyrannical. I'm going to say it's rigor.
Yes.
Which brings me to the oracle question. So my question about the oracle is, there's a scene directly before this, which I think is often cut. There's a scene directly before this where the audience knows that the oracle is coming. We don't know exactly what the oracle is going to say, but we know the people who say it kind of speak optimistically about what the oracle will say in terms of speaking in favor of Hermione. And of course, you know that you're innocent. And so why do you wait? Why do you only unload the oracle at the end? Or why do you only call upon the oracle at the very end, after kind of going through this thing that clearly, at least becomes clear in the scene, is a sham of a trial. Why do you think Hermione holds off?
It's a great question, and I think she feels it's important. She feels that she needs to make her case. I think she feels that, like, the Oracle could say that she's innocent and solve all the problems, but I think she needs to make her case publicly to her people and the people that have come to watch. And I think she needs to make her case to her husband to try to, in some ways, understand him and how this could have happened, and to call him back in a personal way. Because even if the Oracle said she's innocent, everything's fine, this was not true, Leontes made this up, there's no way to heal from that if you just jump from everything he did and locking her up in prison and denying her the child bed and taking the child and casting it out of the country. Like, there's no way to heal from that if the Oracle comes in and says, no, Hermione's telling the truth. You have to have the words, you have to have the argument with each other, I think.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's such a human answer, is right. Like, and I think, frankly, I think we see it in today's world. There's a reason we still do these plays, is that in general, it is part of human nature that when faced with fact, if it is against what we believed in, and if it embarrasses us or shames us, we will deny it. We'll deny that fact. And in fact, Leontes does. Until then he finds out his kid has died. And then he realizes, but his first reaction is denial. And that the one thing that would never be, as you're saying it, once this huge divine power has said X, there's no debate left to be had, which means you can't heal. You can't have the conversation, which is fascinating. So it's fascinating that basically it's part of giving him up is calling upon the Oracle. Once she's called upon the Oracle, she has given up on Leontes and on ever recovering that relationship. And therefore, of course, it's the last thing she tries, because it destroys her first love.
Yes, of course. Definitely. I mean, that's such a wonderful way of putting it, because it's like, if she can bring him back to reason, if she can bring him back to his sanity, we don't even need the Oracle. The Oracle can go back to where it came from. You know what I mean? Like, we don't even need to open that. And I think that's what she's hoping for, is that she can bring this person she loves, her partner, her husband, her king, the father of her children, back to his own mind without divine intervention.
Right. That it reinforces why she's so gentle for so long with him, where she goes like, look, man, that's true. It just ain't me. Right.
Yeah.
Like instead of going, how dare you call me blank, she just goes, no, I that's a great truism, but it just doesn't belong to me.
Yes.
Which I love that when, like, you hone in on this big epic, as you say, public court scene, like there's these two things that distance the scene, is like it's in public and it's a court, it's structured, but that at its core, it's still a really, really personal scene between two people, which I find very interesting. And in fact, those structures are just obstacles to what is a personal conversation. How did you handle that? How did you handle maybe this is a staging question, I don't know, but as an actor, how did you handle the juxtaposition of, I'm speaking to this one person as a wife, but I am also speaking to the crowd, the lords and ladies, as the queen? How did that work for you as an actor?
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the most difficult staging questions in the canon. So it's a difficult question for a director too, is who takes center stage in this scene, and where, and at what point, and where is Leontes in relation to Hermione? And if they're side by side, does that lessen the impact of, their ability to speak to each other? Like, do they require distance? And if they do, where is she in relation to the audience? I mean, it's a really tricky scene to stage. And I think it was, much harder even than the statue scene at the end of the play, which if you stage her too far upstage, every other character has to direct all their lines upstage, which can also be a tricky question. But and if you stage her too far downstage, the poor actress has to stand there like completely frozen. But I think we tried to sort of, if I'm remembering correctly, we tried to solve the problem by creating a middle ground where the scene started, and his throne was right in the center of the stage, and he called me in sort of next to him, and I was facing the audience, and we were in a bit of a thrust, so the audience was sort of all around on 3/4, and so you couldn't help but take in all of the spectators even more easily than I could take in him, because he was just right next to me. And then at some point he walked downstage on the thrust in the middle of one of my speeches, so that there was distance between us and we could see each other and look each other in the eye, or not look each other in the eye, depending on what felt more organically true to the moment, to the text. So as I recall, that's how we did it, but it is a very tricky bit of staging. Very tricky.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about. I'm assuming just from staging kind of Shakespearean staging structures that probably Leontes was on the balcony and Hermione was down center, and both were speaking out. Was just guessing in terms of where they would normally put power structure and stuff like that on that stage. But that's, what a fascinating question. I mean, did you find, from a personal perspective, did you find it, you've mentioned one of them, the "You, my lord, best know." Were there any like lines where you were like, is this to him, or is this to them, or is it to both? Were there any like big like eureka moments of like, oh wait, this one isn't this one, it's this one, or anything like that? Did any of that happen?
Yeah, well, I think like that's part of like the architecture of the two speeches. I think there are more of those personal appeals to Leontes directly in the first speech. And I think it is that moment where she says, "Sir, you speak a language that I understand not." And then, the beginning of that second speech is personal to him. "Sir, spare your threats. Like, you're trying to scare me and you can't, because there's nothing left for me to live for." And then it becomes more public. It's almost like a zoom out. That speech is almost like a zoom out from the two of them to like everything else in her life and in this kingdom that this has affected. And to the point where at the end of it, it's about tyranny. It's not necessarily about their marriage anymore. It's about a tyrant and what he has become, and how his actions affect the entire country, because they affect the law. And so I think like to me, that was sort of the shape that I pulled out of these two speeches.
That makes
also.
I was just going to say that makes a lot of sense. I can see a number of different paths through, but that one makes a lot of sense, and I love the idea that by the end, she is the avatar of the nation trying to heal itself, rather than that it becomes less personal.
Yes, because if you think about her role, I mean, she is a vessel for the nation. And if we're thinking about her role as a queen, she has a duty beyond just being a wife and a mother. She is a vessel, to Apollo, to whatever gods they worship, for the people in the nation, traditionally, right? And so there's a responsibility there beyond just her personal life and how this affects her personal life, because this will affect the whole country, and it does. And I think in some moments she actually gets strength from the fact that this is a public trial, and she is on display. And at some moments in the speeches, she weaponizes that to shame him.
Well, and that reminds me, they do the same thing in the play The White Devil, where one of the problems with putting someone on a stand is they get to talk.
Yeah.
And if they're good at it, you suddenly have power. Which I agree, Hermione flips the power in the scene, even amidst all of her tragedy. She denies the power of the court, and flips
Absolutely.
it into herself.
And there's no way that you should even think that's possible based on the state that she comes into the scene, the physical state she's in when she enters the scene. I mean, she is probably an absolute mess, having just given birth and in a nightgown. I mean, there's nothing. She's defenseless, and she can probably barely stand up. But in some ways, that again is the playwright telling you to like keep it simple. You know, you're not going to have an actor climbing all over the stage and jumping up on his throne, because she is not physically capable of it. So he's telling you as a playwright to plant your feet and speak your truth to power. And that's the best she can do. And I always find it interesting that like the only other person in the play who at any point says that this was Hermione's fault is Antigonus, when he is dropping off the baby in Bohemia, when he's casting out the baby and leaving the baby. He says something like, "Oh, the storm begins, poor wretch, that for thy mother's fault art thus exposed to loss and what may follow." And he's the only other person in the play who ever says this was Hermione's fault, even if he only says it in that one line. And a moment later, he's being pursued by a bear. Do you know what I mean? A moment later, nature comes for him. And nature says, like, no way, man. You know what I mean? And I just love that. I love that metaphor of the only other person who sort of sullies her name or says this is her fault, not Leontes' fault, not the person who actually created all this destruction and trauma. The famous line of "exit pursued by bears" on this poor guy. It's great.
It's a very interesting point you make, because I do think in some ways Winter's Tale is very much a morality play. The good people win, the bad people lose. Leontes, in one of the saddest moments in the whole canon, when he comes back to his sanity later in this scene and looks around and realizes he has destroyed everything that he cares for, which is, I think, I won't even say good person's nightmare, is like something happens, you do something insane, and you wake up from it and you've destroyed everything. And it's your fault. Like, what a nightmare. And then has to appeal to it or atone for it for 16 years. It is a legitimate morality play, but the one element that I find interesting about it is that while it is very clear that the court does not agree with Leontes, the lords are so fast with the oracle after you call on the oracle. Like, you call on the oracle, and I think it might even be a shared line with the next lord who's like, yeah, that, let's do that. Like, right away. I'm not sure if it's shared, but if it's not, it's immediate. Yeah. But
it is shared. Yeah.
It's shared. It's like, so it's very clear that no one believes this of you, but also only Paulina and Camillo stand up to Leontes. Everyone else goes with him despite knowing that it's wrong, because they are afraid of losing their own life, power, and position. And it is another element of this play that I find very interesting. I find what Shakespeare may or may not have been saying about sort of absolute power in the hands of one man is a very interesting, especially for someone who's kind of known as a monarchist, is an interesting commentary in this play of, this was a good man. This was a good man with absolute power, but he was a man, and things happen. And suddenly he wasn't a good man, and no one stopped him. It was actually, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, some people tried to stop him, but none of his lords stopped him. None of the people that could have benefited from his power, who were adjacent to his power, tried to stop him.
Right. They were willing to see an innocent woman fall rather than risk their own fall. They're willing to see their country move into tyranny rather than do that. And I think that that's an interesting, and it's obviously something that Shakespeare explored in Julius Caesar and in other plays, is this sort of question of power and the corruption of it and the ability to fight it. And I think that this play tackles it from a very sophisticated place and puts a lot in the hands of the person who should least have to do it. The person
Yes.
who is pulled out of giving birth to come and have the conversation is really fascinating.
For sure. It's like the play is an amazing intersection of like the personal and the political and the question of faith, sort of the personal and the political and the spiritual. And you know, Leontes just becoming this complete tyrant and becoming so destructive, and sort of all the collateral damage that ensues because of his behavior, but also that we do jump 16 years and we do jump to Bohemia, and it's springtime, and it's like this flower festival, and there's dancing, and it's it's like this whole second half of the play is very much of the earth and out of the court. And we that even his tyranny couldn't stop nature and couldn't stop life force, and that Perdita is alive and well and admired and thriving in this place, and sort of beloved by everyone in her community. It's such a sort of wonderful thing that Shakespeare is doing, showing us the court and showing us nature, and how where they intersect and how. And I just think it's amazing. It's almost a more nuanced conversation about power than so many of his earlier plays are purely sort of political plays, even though they're all human. They're all like incredibly human, but this one is really nuanced because of the way the personal and the spiritual intersect with the political in this particular play.
And the way I think that the audience, if the play is done correctly, the audience knows Leontes truly believes it, right? Yeah. They know that he's not Richard III. He's not Macbeth even. He's not a moral man who's choosing to compromise himself. He is a moral man who thinks he is following morality and has just lost sense of reality. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, a fascinating, yet another thing that in today's world, where I do think due to how we receive communication now, there is an interesting conversation about like the fact that we can live in different realities in the same world. Yes, is absolutely. A very interesting thing of like, these are two human beings who love each other, who are perfect for each other. Mm-hmm. But because they have two different realities, they become mortally opposed.
Yes. And they cannot understand each other. You speak a language I understand not. Like that the realities have separated them. The sort of stories they are telling themselves are entirely different. And I think it's an amazing play about faith and what it means to have a crisis of faith, that you could be in a strong, healthy, vibrant marriage, and you could have a crisis of faith and everything could come unraveled. You could be the leader of a thriving country and you could have a crisis of faith and throw your country into chaos. And that it all sort of comes back to that like, of course, famous line of Paulina's, it is required you do awake your faith before the family is able to fully reunite and be together again. I think that's one of the most amazing things about this play, is that it's as much about faith as it is about power and retribution and revenge and all those things.
Who does she say that line to? She says it to the group of
them? She says it to Leontes. She says it to Leontes. They are in a group and they're speaking to the group, and it is Perdita and Florizel and Paulina, and they're all waiting to see this statue that everyone has heard so much about of Hermione. And but she says, she directs it specifically to him. I'm trying to find it here.
The reason I find it such an interesting line is question of course, it's also true for Hermione.
Yes.
Is that, yes, here it is. Leontes says, what you can make her do, I am content to look on. What to speak, I am content to hear, for 'tis as easy to make her speak as move. And
Yes.
politeness says, it is required you do awake your faith. Then all stand still, or those that think it is unlawful business I'm about, let them depart.
Yeah.
And so it's actually not clear. See, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't making an idiot of myself. Because I've always thought that line could be to Hermione. Is that line is, will Hermione make that act of forgiveness, of mercy, that reawakens her faith in Leontes and therefore reawakens her? Like, will she take that giant leap of faith, true legitimate leap of faith, to reawaken herself to this man who did the worst thing possible? But
That's
I'm
wonderful,
fascinated.
though. That's a wonderful idea. And reading that, so that, she knows Hermione can hear them, and she knows Hermione's listening, and so that it could very well be to her too, whether that's ever explicit to the audience or not. It's just a wonderful thing for the actors to be aware of and to play with.
Yeah, and
that's
it's such a beautifully optimistic play, as you're saying. It's like, it can be as dark as everything we just read and looked through, and as sad. Like, it's some of that scene that we just read, I think, is one of the hardest journeys for any actor of any gender doing either of those two roles. Is you go from that low, and then 16 years of nature and healing and growth and faith, and then by the end there is at least the hope of healing at the end of that.
Of a future, of the thing that you thought was lost, that is restored, which is everyone's great hope, is that the things you lose, you may not lose forever. And of course they did lose Mamilius forever. Their son is gone, and there's no reunion with Mamilius. So it is an imperfect reunion. It is not entirely whole, but that's just part of the truth of what happened to them.
Well, and that is, and again, not that one is supposed to necessarily be looking for Shakespeare's own life in his plays. It's tricky to do, but we do know that this is at this point an older man who knows that his son is not coming back and has been an absent father to his daughter, and writes quite a lot of plays about, at this time in his life, about old men and their daughters and failures or successes with them. And so he's once again, it's very, very human. It's like, they might come back together, but it's not like, and everything's fine. They'll have to work at it.
And they have to live with what happened forever. They will always have to deal with the trauma of what happened and reconcile themselves to the destruction. But it is hopeful. It is ultimately hopeful that a future is possible. We don't know what it is yet. And I love that they walk off stage and we don't know what happens. I love that the audience has to lend their imaginations to the very last moment of this play and beyond, because we don't know what's going to happen with this family. And it's really kind of magical in that way.
Yeah, that hope isn't a period. Hope is an ellipsis. Hope.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Yeah, well, it's gorgeous.
This has been wonderful, Kelley. I don't want to take any more of your time. But it's been really, really great digging into Shakespeare with you. I hope you know what a joy it is for me, and I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and talk. And hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
I would love that. This has been such a pleasure to talk to one of my favorite people about one of my favorite plays. It's just the best of all possible worlds. So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, shucks. Well, on that note, our revels now are ended. Until next time, thank you for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your support helps us to bring you more captivating conversations and insights into the world of classic theater. To stay updated on our latest activities, follow us on social media, get on our mailing list, and visit www.redbulltheater.com, where you'll find an abundance of podcasts, readings, classes, seminars, productions, and more. Your support makes all of this possible, so please consider making a tax-deductible donation on our website to help us continue bringing classical theater to contemporary audiences. Until next time, thanks, and ever thanks.